Good morning. How are you doing out there? We are talking about Chapter 13, Lesson 2, and what we're talking about today as we kind of move forward is this issue of how are we going to stop the commies. Remember, the commies, we talked about the beginning of the Cold War here the other day, yesterday, and so now we're talking about how are we going to be able to stop the commies from spreading their power and influence. Remember, as we talked about it yesterday, that what we had seen here was communism spread throughout Eastern Europe because the Soviet Union refused to remove its army and it wanted all kinds of things that we discussed yesterday, like a weak Germany and many other things. So the question is going to be, how are we going to stop those commies from spreading any further? And the answer there is going to have to do with what the president learns from his advisor who's spending time in Moscow. That man's name is George Kennan. George Kennan sends a telegram to the president from Moscow, and he tells the president, President Truman if you forgot, just what he thinks about those Soviets. Can we beat the Soviets? President Truman asks George Kennan, and George Kennan comes and he says, President Truman, we can beat the Soviets without going to war. He sends him a message called the Long Telegram, and it's a very long message that goes across the waves. And he says, in order to beat the USSR, we have to contain them. And their country will fall apart on their own over time. That's the idea. Containment, as you can see here, is the policy of preventing the expansion of a hostile power. What we're trying to prevent here is the expansion of the Soviet Union. Imagine, if you will, here on the Soviet Union, a gigantic black wall all the way around the Soviet Union. They can't spread their ideas any further. They've already spread them to Eastern Europe. That's far enough. We don't need them to go any further. Stay inside the Soviet Union so that every time the Soviets try to spread to other places, perhaps Mongolia or China or Iran or other places in Europe, we're able to say, nope, 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 and nope. So containment is going to be a series of policies and ideas that our country uses over 50 years to try, well, more like 40, but still, to try and contain the communists. Keep them in the Soviet Union. That's the plan anyway. Some of the ones we'll talk about right here are going to be called the Truman Doctrine. This concept of being willing to fight the spread of communism wherever it occurs. Let's see what that's going to look like. Oh, hey there. So we know that President Truman wasn't a big fan of those communists that were there, right? And we're going to see him here try and use his Truman Doctrine in a couple of different ways. And what he's going to do here is, again, look to contain the Soviets inside their country. So here's some of the ways that we're going to do that. This doctrine that Harry Truman comes up with essentially says to the rest of the world, that we're going to fight communism wherever it's going to spread. So we're going to see several different ideas, one of them being the Truman Doctrine, that is going to try and see wherever the commies are going to spread, we're going to get right in there and we're just going to push them right on back. That's the plan. So one of the places that we're going to see that happen is Iran. Let me just show you kind of where that fits. So here's a big old map of the Soviet Union. You can see that Soviet Union right here, all in red. These are the little states inside the Soviet Union, kind of like we have Pennsylvania, and Connecticut and whatnot. So we have the Soviet Union here in dark red, and of course in pink we have the satellite nations that have to follow Soviet policies and ideas. And here, down at the bottom, we have Iran. And what the Soviet Union wants to do is turn Iran into a satellite nation. The idea is that since Iran has a lot of oil, that if they're a satellite nation, the Soviets can control more of the world's oil reserves and deny it to the West, to those democratic capitalist countries that they just don't like. That's the idea anyway. So they have this desire to go in there America, we're not going to like that. President Truman is actually going to threaten to send the army in after the communists in Iran. And the idea here is going to be to try and drive them out of Iran. Can you believe that? Crazy. Another example that I can show you of where we, in the Truman Doctrine, pledge to fight communism wherever it decides to go, is in Turkey. And once again, we're going to see Joseph Stalin want to try and make Turkey into a satellite nation. And we know that Truman's not going to want to let that happen. So what we're going to do is wonder, well, why? Why does he want to do that? Why does he want to go to Turkey? And the idea there is that if he can go to Turkey, well, then Joseph Stalin's going to be able to get some things. He's going to be able to get a warm water port. So he can just move his ships right on down here and his navy anytime he wants. That's why he wants what he calls the Dardanelles Straits as part of Turkey. The Dardanelles Straits, in case you're wondering, are this little smidge of land that's right here. Let me show you. Right here. I'll circle it for you. Whoop. That little smidge of land right there. That's the way that Stalin can get his ships and navy out into the rest of the world with no one the wiser. So Truman's going to do whatever he can to keep Turkey from becoming a satellite nation, because then the Soviets can send their navy and their trade wherever they want 12 months out of the year. So what Truman's going to do instead is he's going to ask Congress for $400 million so that we can, instead of letting the Soviets turn to Turkey into a satellite nation of their communist country, we're going to try and turn them into a satellite nation of the United States. That's the plan anyway. But both of these examples, whether it's denying the Soviets Iran's oil or the Dardanelles Straits in Turkey, the whole goal here is to keep communism from spreading. You just want to keep it all locked up. So that's containment. So we have this one delightful way of thinking about containment, the Truman Doctrine, this idea that wherever communism decides to go, we will be there to prevent it from spreading.
Arnold, please report to the main office.
Samantha Arnold, main office, please. So we're going to come up with another type of containment, and we're going to call it the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is a very simple idea. Remember this idea right here. Boop. Satellite nations. I can't even keep that up anymore. Satellite nations, remember that we saw in the early, or I should say the late 1940s, we saw a whole host of countries in Eastern Europe become the satellite nations of the Soviet Union, right? They have to follow Soviet policies. We want to keep the rest of the nations in Europe that were a part of World War II from becoming Soviet satellites. So how can you do that? Well, one of the ways of doing it is helping them rebuild. If we can give them billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, then they're going to become dependent on us. Think of it this way. Your life is a disaster. So you need someone to help you rebuild your life. Now, there are two competing ideas. One of those ideas says, yes, you can rebuild your life with us, but you have to sacrifice your freedom. If you sacrifice your freedom, everyone is guaranteed a better life. Some of you won't have great lives. In fact, most of you won't have great lives, but everyone's guaranteed a better life. That's going to be attractive to a lot of people. On the other side, someone else says, hey, I can help you rebuild your life. Some of you are going to do really, really great. Some of you, you'll do okay. Some of you, you're not really going to do well at all. Right? That's capitalism. Communism is where everyone does a little bit better, but nobody gets to rise really, 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 really high, right? Unless you're in the dictator's favor. Capitalism says you're going to have an upper class, a middle class, and a lower class. Well, those people in the middle and the lower class are going to be really attractive to communism because they're guaranteed at least a reasonable life. America has to convince people that the opportunity that capitalism brings is the best way to go about business. So the Marshall Plan says we're going to give $4 billion in supplies and machinery to Western Europe to help them rebuild their countries. If we give it to Finland and Norway and Sweden and Britain and France and Belgium and the Netherlands and the parts of Germany that the Allies control and Italy and Greece and Turkey, if we give them that money, then they'll look at us as their savior. And instead of becoming Soviet satellite nations, they'll become satellite nations of the West, of America. That's the plan, anyway. So America begins this process of funding large amounts of dollars into Western Europe. And the Soviets look at this and realize that they're going to lose their chance at creating satellite nations, especially when we do something. We, along with Britain and France, decide that this version of a divided Germany no longer is functional or makes sense. We know that we're in a Cold War with the Soviets at this point. We know that it's not going to get better anytime soon. So they're on one side, and we've weakened ourselves by splitting up West Germany. So we say, why not reunite all of those areas in West Germany into one actual new country? So that's what we do. We take the British zone and the French zone and the American zone, we combine them, we call it West Germany. And when the Soviets see this, they realize that they will never get the reparations that they want. So instead of sending in troops to take West Germany over, instead of sending in troops to take over the parts of Berlin that the Allies still control, they build a wall around Allied West Berlin. Remember, West Berlin was controlled by the Allies. West Berlin now belongs to West Germany. And they build this wall around it. And they build the wall around it to keep people in the East from escaping to the West. The concept there is that they are trying to limit Soviet access to democracy. Instead of invading, we intuitively and creatively come up with a different solution. We call it the Berlin Airlift. The goal is to fly supplies into West Berlin and to keep those people safe, secure, and well supplied in the face of that Soviet aggression. This is yet another example of how we're able to contain that attempt at expansion into Berlin so that the West can maintain its democracy there. If this experience of containment using the Truman Doctrine to keep the Soviets from occupying West Germany and West Berlin taught us anything, it's that we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to contain the Soviets in Eastern Europe and not letting them spread beyond the Iron Curtain. So we create with our allies an organization that we call the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's designed for mutual defense. It's an alliance that all the nations in blue here join in 1949. You can see them there, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Norway, and Denmark are all part of this alliance, as are the Netherlands and Belgium. But there's one thing I want you to see here too. This little section of Germany joined. Remember that we had, in the face of that Soviet aggression, allowed West Germany to kind of recreate itself, right? This West German nation now is going to be able to have an army and an air force and a navy again. We're going to let it do that. We're going to let West Germany rearm itself and join NATO. The idea is that that will definitely keep the Soviets from attacking from Eastern Germany, which you can see there in red on the map below my chins, I said chins, plural, and it's going to keep them from invading West Berlin, that section of the Berlin city that the western part of Germany still possesses. The Soviets see this, and they realize that with West Germany rearmed, there needs to be some sort of military alliance that's going to stand up against NATO in case the West, democracies and capitalism, ever decides to invade. So they create something called the Warsaw Pact in direct response to our decision to allow West Germany to rearm and join NATO. And so now what you're going to end up with is a world that looks like what you see here. On one side, we have Warsaw Pact nations, including East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, and so on, versus the NATO nations that you can see on that same map in blue. And these nations and their alliances will continue all the way up until 1991, when the Soviet Union finally falls apart. Since that time, more and more nations have actually joined NATO, and many of them used to be Warsaw Pact nations. So on this map, what you can see is how NATO has expanded since the Soviet Union collapsed. And many of those former Soviet satellite nations where communism was present, many of them have since joined NATO. Germany, Eastern Germany merged with Western Germany in '89, and it becomes one country. They join, Poland joins, the Czech Republic joins, Slovakia joins, Hungary, Romania, they join, Albania joins, Croatia joins, a whole bunch of places join us and be part of NATO, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. So we just see a real expansion of this idea of NATO, and it's still present, to keep kind of that Russian communist, old way of ruling back to the east. That's the idea anyway. So how else are we going to contain communism as it goes forward? And the answer there is not well. Even though we have the Truman Doctrine that says we're going to fight worldwide, and we have NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, there's still a threat to containment that emerges because nations in Asia still go communist. We don't successfully contain communism from spreading into Asia. Take a look at what I mean. Here's a map of the world. Now we know that over here we have the Iron Curtain, and we've successfully kept communism from spreading into Western Europe with the Marshall Plan, with other attempts at containment, like when we paid Turkey $400 million, we threatened to use the military in Iran. So those are all wins. But we fail to stop communism from spreading into Mongolia, China, and North Korea. In particular, North Korea, that's not that big of a deal for us. That happened right after World War II. It was part of the treaty at the Empire of Japan collapses. They kind of go their own way. And what we agree with the Soviets is that since you helped us defeat Japan, we'll let half of North Korea be communist, or half of Korea be communist and half of it be democratic. But the real big scary one to us is China. We didn't see that one coming. They had a civil war there. This guy that you can see here, funny-looking dude, his name is Mao Zedong. He leads the communists in China. Another guy named Chiang Kai-shek leads the nationalists in China. They're actually fascists, kind of like Mussolini. And the civil war rages there, and we really kind of think that the fascists, the nationalists, they're gonna win. But they don't. Mao Zedong is able to make China communist, and America and Americans in general just didn't see it coming. That establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, that's when China goes communist, it's absolutely shocking to us that such a large nation becomes so communist. And you might imagine that this really changes the way we think about other nations in the region when the world's most populous country all of a sudden goes communist. So think about it. What nation that is near to China, that was our former enemy, now needs to become our former friend, just like West Germany became our ally? And that answer there is going to be Japan. Even though they attacked us by surprise, and so many of us saw our families' lives changed in World War II, Japan becomes our ally. In fact, they're our closest ally in the world right now, still today. They are our closest ally. Right behind them comes South Korea, a nation that turns to us since North Korea became communist. The Philippines, a former colony. becomes allied with us to try and stop communism. Taiwan, where the nationalists flee to from China when the communists take over, becomes an ally. And what you see here is another, essentially, iron curtain. We're going to try and keep communism behind this line in Asia. We don't want it to spread anymore. We're not going to be successful, but we're going to try. So, what else does this look like, this trying to contain it behind that curtain? And the answer there is going to be war. That's how we're going to contain them. You see, here is what Korea looks like in 1950, June of 1950. You can see the line right here that's in place. This is the border that was created in 1950. Top half communist, bottom half capitalist and democratic. The communists are going to invade in 1950. They're going to head south. And in a matter of months, June, July, August, by September, they have driven us back, so that all America has is that little smidge of land right down here in blue. That's it. Now we're going to counterattack. Americans, led by General Douglas MacArthur, the United Nations, we're going to get involved. We're going to counterattack. We get reinforcements from Japan. We're going to attack, counterattack, and we're going to drive those people who attacked us back and back and back, almost to the border with China. At this point, there's a debate. Well, what do we do? Oh my God, should we keep going? Should we invade China? Should we just totally remove communism from North Korea, make it democratic, and just keep going? General MacArthur wants to use nukes. He wants to actually blow up and attack China using nuclear weapons and make it democratic again. Or should we stop? There's a fight over this, an argument. MacArthur actually gets fired because he refuses to follow President Truman's lead. President Truman doesn't want to invade China. He wants this war to be a limited war. And that's really important. It's one of the most important terms you can ever know, because he doesn't want Korea to become a total war. He wants to limit his commitment of resources, only as many troops as you need. A limited objective: free South Korea, stop the invasion. Type of containment: we don't want to destroy the world, we just want to keep it from spreading, contain it. China, not knowing what we're going to do, freaks out and actually invades. And the Chinese army and the American army and the United Nations army fight each other. And this is what it looks like in 1953, several years later, when an armistice is actually signed. The war has not ended. There has been no peace treaty. The Korean War is still active. The Chinese troops withdraw, North Korean communists return to their north, the South Koreans return to the south, and that's the status quo today. Now, what does it look like? Because of the war, we have an increase in commitment to Asia. It's a turning point in the Cold War. Now we have an incredible military buildup in Asia, especially in South Korea, as we face off against North Korea. Thousands of U.S. troops are still there. That's the North Korean leader, a guy named Kim Jong-un. Lots of people think he's funny.
Respect my authority, because I'm a dictator. I'm at my to the post.
But the bottom line is, to stop this from spreading, we use the military in Asia. And we're going to use the military again, not just in North Korea, which is technically a victory because we stop it from spreading. But in future chapters, we'll see where we use it in other places. I think that's good for now. Remember, limited war. Don't tell anybody. Write that down on a slip of paper for me. Make sure you put your name on it. Hand it to me tomorrow. Limited war. Don't tell. Shh. Don't tell. Don't tell. And we'll go from there.